I'm Robert Bell. I'm the Executive Director of World Teleport Association. I'm normally here with our Director of Projects and Certification, Randall Barney, but he's on travel right now, so I'm solo. If you're not familiar with WTA, have been around since 1985, doing the same couple of things, advocating for the commercial and business interests of teleport operators, but also promoting excellence in operations, in technology, and in business practices. And today's webinar is a part of that. It's based upon a report that we published a short time ago called Designing the Software-Defined Ground Segment of the Future, which we believe is very much of the future. And this webinar, like many of them, is a product of our Technology Advisory Board. And this is a group that we put together to deal with the fact that teleport operators are facing rising challenges and opportunities of all kinds. And increasingly, to master them, you really have to understand technology innovation in a way that perhaps was not true 10 years ago, for instance, when technology innovation proceeded at a slower pace. And so our Tech Advisory Board exists to provide guidance on those advances and also to do some advising around what's a smart thing to buy right now. The membership in that is open to our leader and patron members, and they're listed on the right: Comtech, Kratos Defense and Space, Network Innovations, U.S. Government, and Space Bridge. We're very proud to have them. If you'd like some more information on that, please reach out to rbarney@worldteleport.org. Today, our agenda is pretty straightforward as usual. After this brief introduction, I'm going to share with you some key takeaways from that report, and then we're going to go into the panel discussion and hear from some real experts about what's ahead for us in terms of the software-defined teleport. Finally, a couple of thank yous. This report has been sponsored by ST Engineering iDirect. We're very proud to have that company as a member and also to have their sponsorship for this report, because it's one that has obviously hit a lot of hot buttons for people. It seems to be something everybody's very concerned about and wants to know a great deal more about. So thanks to you, ST Engineering iDirect. And in general, our research reports, our webinars are also made possible by this group of companies who are our industry leaders. We thank them very much for their financial support for programs that are central to our member value. Okay, takeaways from the report. Some interesting ones. I've had discussions with a few people, both on the technology front and the operations front in companies. And one of the things that I occasionally hear is that, it's too soon. This is all stuff is out there somewhere else. We don't want to deal with it right now. And the answer is, well, that's nice, but it's your customers who are asking for it. It is customer demand very clearly that's driving this digitization of ground segment. And part of that is the increasing software definition of the space segment. Of course, LEO is all software defined. Increasingly, GEO and MEO are, as well as demands from major users, right? And by major users, I'm talking about, among other things, military customers who see this as being a very important part of their future and want this commercial industry to show greater flexibility and greater adaptability than it has in the past. Preparing for that digital transition is not optional, unfortunately, for those of us who would prefer to reserve our spending on something else. We're not going to be abandoning hardware anytime soon, but we are going to be continuously improving on it and also implementing artificial intelligence, which of course can only be done digitally, to navigate these accelerating market changes. So those are clear trends that both our teleport operators and our technology providers are telling us about. The other thing that surprised me, frankly, is that software-defined teleports are already a reality. And that's right now, it's just on a single case basis, again, very often with a government customer who needs certain capabilities and is willing to pay for them. But expansion to handle multiple customers and services is coming if we can get standards in place and get compliance certification of those standards in place. Fortunately, there are organizations like DIFI, the Digital IF Interoperability Coalition, that's working on that specific problem, and we'll be hearing more about that later. And finally, the good news for those of us who have to invest in these technologies is that near-term performance improvements are available from your investments that you're making this year, and they're coming through in terms of improved customer experience, higher availability, and better performance, generally speaking. Meanwhile, your brethren on the tech side of the industry are telling us that there's going to be much bigger rewards ahead in terms of accessing new customer and market growth that currently is out of reach right now. And I personally am a believer, but you can make up your own mind. We have a set of panelists who really know this subject backwards and forwards. First, there is Bert van den Linden, who is Senior Principal Product Manager at ST Engineering and iDirect. He's joined by Will Mudge, who's Vice President Engineering and Operations at Speedcast, a major operator. Frank Zullo, who is President of Network Innovations Advanced Networks, which is working on the cutting edge of developing technologies like these and integrating them into operations. Stuart Doutridge, Vice President, Advanced Technology and Business Development at Kratos Defense and Space, also moonlights as Chairman of DIFI, so he certainly can bring us some insights there. And finally, Dan Hobel, who's Manager of Systems Engineering at SSC Space, that's Swedish Space Corporation's Space Division. So welcome to all of you. Glad to have you with us. And my first question is basically to ask each of you to tell us briefly about yourself and how you and your company relate to our topic today, which is, of course, designing the digital ground segment.
So yes, I'm product manager in the iDirect team that is focusing on the digital ground. So I'm responsible for the deployment, virtualization, and cloudification of the ground segment. Our involvement in this topic is pretty dense. We have, of course, the necessary research and active development ongoing, both in the exploration as well as in the execution of our core vision and strategy, meaning that most of our platform components today are already fully software as we ship them today, but we are enhancing and bringing more flexibility to the platform with regards to the dynamic area where they get deployed on. So orchestration, moving workloads into the public cloud, combination both private and hybrid or private and public cloud is key as part of the proof of concepts that we are running, for instance, with Azure, where we are exploring, okay, what are the, what's the combination between, what is technically possible as well as what is commercially viable for our operators, customers. So we're involved in a couple of those POCs. You've seen us on social media, what our progress is on the virtual modem, as well as on what we call our packet processing and network processing, which we are heavily running POCs on. So as part of that strategy, I'm responsible for driving that roadmap and working with key customers to, cloudify or more bring more dynamics onto their workflows. So two pieces I want to make clear, Rob, on this webinar. It's all around digitization, but to us there is two mainstream topics in there. That's indeed going full software, being able to run both the control part as the data part in a cloud native environment. But then you have also the digital part of it, as you mentioned in your report, moving away from the traditional analog L-band transport into more, IP workflows, where DIFI is indeed an important, topic where we are heavily participating in as a key member, driving with the key, participants around this call to make sure that the standards reflect the needs of our customers on the ability to bring, digital or radio over IP towards the antenna.
That's a lot. Thank you. It's an interesting distinction you made. Stuart, that sounds like a cue for me to turn to you.
Sounds good. So Stuart Doutridge from Kratos, and what we do is satellite ground systems, everything from antennas back through the signal processing. Our big approach and main effort is to virtualize the ground system. We think digitize it close to the antenna as possible and do all processing after that in software on generic x86 compute provides the most flexibility and allow for the most dynamic ground systems at the best cost price points. And the other thing is we are firm believers in following the standards to allow for scalability of those systems, whether that be Diffie. We announced today that we achieved MEF 3.0 compliance. We're the first SATCOM ground system to achieve that level of compliance all the way through the SATCOM service, so that you can do QoS and your SLAs all the way through, from the telco all the way through a SATCOM system. And so yeah, our approach is digitize a close-the antenna and move everything else into virtual network functions, whether that be the combiners of software routing or the packet routing, or whether that be the signal processing itself. And we're operational in the TT&C and Earth observation mission download market today. We have over 100 operational networks with that type of infrastructure. And we're doing proof of concepts now in the SATCOM broadband communications market.
Interesting. Let's turn to an operator here. Will, you're the, I guess now that I'm looking at this, you're the lone guy who actually has to has to deliver signal to people here. So
well, I don't know.
how
I
does
think
this look to
network
you?
innovations. I think Frank's got some there too. So I don't think
Oh,
I'm
he
all by
does. Well,
myself this time, which
Frank's
is
done
good.
everything, so that's I'm surprised.
So hi, my name's Will Mudge. I work for SpeedCast. I'm the vice president of engineering. We are a provider, like Robert said. We have our own teleport infrastructure. We have 19 different teleports around the world with over 220 something antennas, over 100 and something different satellites. So we're quite large from a teleport operator perspective. Our part in this is, we provide a lot of IP connectivity to many customers. We're the largest in what we do. Just about any customer you can think of, I think we've serviced or serviced at some point in our time and careers. But we see it from that IP layer and from the space assets, right? So, what Bert and what Stuart were talking about tend to become parts of our end solutions that we deliver to customers. So we see a lot of the software defined in the teleports and how we have to deliver our solutions, and then what that means to our customers at the end of the day. So I find myself bringing, a lot of customer type perspective to these panels and how they function and work. And for us, what software defined means to us is, honestly, it brings a better customer experience, right? The more seamless you can provide that, and the more data you can provide to it, the more hands-off you can get onto it, and things just work, the better off it is for all of us. And we have these great software-defined satellites out there that really bring a lot of flexibility to the market space. And having these new products where they're so software-centric, where we can use APIs to try to command and move things around, really increases the abilities that we have to service our customers at the end of the day. So, we're excited about the software evolution into teleports and into the services and satellite services in total, because I think we would all kind of agree the teleports, being a teleport guy myself, this is kind of the core to some of the satellite offerings. If we didn't have the teleports, how do you talk to your satellites at the end of the day? So, by being able to have that software flexibility and being able to abstract a little bit away from the physical layer to be able to move these things around is really an important feature that's necessary for our industry as we move forward.
Interesting. I jotted this down just because it really struck me. The more hands-off you are, the better for your customers. That's certainly a revolution in how we do things, isn't it?
It is. It's funny because I think it's actually hard for our customers to accept, right? They're so used to having such a tactile feel. And my favorite analogy is Starlink, right? When Starlink first came out and there's no CIR on the service, who's going to adopt it at an enterprise level with no CIR? And yet we still see a lot of adoption, right? It's a major change in how our industry focuses and thinks into something that's new. And it's great, right? It really brings a lot of opportunities. And I think more flexibility, like I said, as we go forward.
Sooner or later, we have to not get over the fact that we can't pick up the phone, talk to the operator, and say, "Please connect me to Harold." Instead, we just have to dial Harold's number. Yeah,
I don't know if we've gone that far back, but
Frank, I want to turn to you since you got called out in terms of your relationship to this particular topic.
Sure. So in Advanced Networks, a business unit of Network Innovations, we actually, I can say we sit in both the customer and the integrator side to this equation. So you know, my colleagues on the panel, where we get to buy from you, and then we also have to tell our customers why they should buy from you as well. So it's a little bit of a unique position. We're a little bit more niche in that regard. So a lot of our customers, you know, to put it in plain language, ask me, so what? You know, we can talk about digitization, we can talk about whatever, you know, cloudification, and you know, the end customer that we have really wants to move their data from point A to point B. So they say, so what, when it comes to digitization. The easiest answer I say to it is and you know, calling out what Stuart said, and it's not only signal processing, but it's data movement, it's orchestration, it's what have you. It really comes down to, you know, resilience and quality, and to use your analogy, nobody wants to say, do you call the operator to call Harold, or do you dial the phone to call Harold? The end result is broader than that. Now it's, I have to communicate to Harold, and they don't care whether it's over the phone or whether it's chat or what have you. So with those broader sort of definitions in our customer base, meeting the needs to them and requires us, and you hit the words at the beginning, you know, flexibility and adaptability. They want us to behave as close to, I used to say, as close to a terrestrial network as possible. But I guess with concepts of the outer net and things like that, we don't necessarily have to limit it to terrestrial anymore. I break it down to the simple idea: customers want to move from point A to point B with their data, and they want to do it in a flexible, adaptable manner because they don't know where their data is going to be. It could be C, D, E, or F tomorrow. But to me, digitization in the near term is resilience.
That's a really good definition. Thank you. Let's give the last word on this particular question to Dan. Dan, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'm with SSC Space, Swedish Space Corporation. I'm fortunate enough, I'm managing our system engineering team, which gives me great access to the decisions and the development of our solutions and our products that we can offer. Within that, I'm part of SSC Connect, which is the ground segment that we provide. And it's a global network of services, tracking stations, and more traditional telecom communications that we provide. But we are in the middle of the transition from the traditional to the digital software-defined ground network. It's our customers tend to be more one-off solutions, very, you know, their core is on hardware. And this, you know, as it goes back in the Francis, you know, so what? It does matter. These customers do come in with the so what, and, you know, they just want your traditional services. But there's a lot of advantages. And the opportunities that we get is to be able to present our customers with this new digital transformation, what the digital ground services can provide and the benefits from. So you get people that have been doing this for years, flying a few spacecraft, they get exposed to these new opportunities and the new features that come with it. So that's the exciting part that we can offer as we're transitioning. We are rolling out some new fully digital platforms. We are going to run traditional and digital in parallel, and it's an exciting time. So this is really a good, you know, good way to get going. We're really close to, you know, the future is here, and you know, this is a good kickoff meeting, you know, and get the word out.
That is the idea. So thank you. Okay, so a couple of you have already touched on this, but what the heck are we talking about when we're talking about a software-defined ground segment? Bert, you defined it as two specific things, which I thought was interesting. In your opening comments, as being both, you know, about going full software in your what used to be the, you know, the post RF chain to digitizing a lot of things. So not being an engineer, I didn't entirely understand that distinction. So maybe you just give us a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, sure. So typically, as also Stuart alluded to, so that there's with our solution, there's like four platform functions in the solution. You obviously have the NMS or the control platform that overlooks the different elements of our platform, but mainly when we talk to the data path, so the point-to-point or the point-to-multipoint connectivity between point A, B and B, A or B, C is what we call the data path. Mainly consists of on the ground of what we call preparing the packets that go into the modulator, demodulator chain. Often we say CDC or network processing or packet processing. That's today fully already on our the last 5-6 years shipping standard products, purely running in software in combination of containers and virtual machines. And then it needs to touch what we call our modulator demodulator chain. As you probably know us from the market, iDirect focuses a lot on broadband use cases, the VSAT platform and shared medium, where we have ATDMA of the iDirect and MRC 100 of the new tech history, which is a shared medium environment which asks or which requires from the modems a quite heavy, I would call it CPU intensive demand. So that part, so those two blocks, we are so first part, network processing, fully virtual, fully software today. The modem, there we have the two tracks. We both have the software track as well as the hardware track. Maybe a first word to the hardware track is that we see, of course, we want to achieve same and similar performance as we are performing today with our platform. So that's why our next gen appliance type mod demods focuses heavily on that total cost of ownership. We see a lot of spectrum demand with our customers. I can tell you that densities and powers consumption is one of the key elements that we today are confronted with. So that's today still a hardware device, but that also transitions to software. So for specific use cases like our point-to-point SAPC type use cases, where you have S2X, forward return, there we already see that from a TCO perspective. You can make the business case to work. Now, the moment you are in software, then of course you don't have that traditional access to the L-band signal anymore. As Stuart says, the digitizer plays a role. But also, if you look to a little bit, more downstream to the antenna, we're working with vendors that are at the moment working on a full digital ODU, where you could in fact, stay fully in the digital domain. So those two parts in the solution, both the software on the network processing, the software on the modem, has a dedicated attention with us within iDirect. And then it's a matter of, if you look to the end-to-end ecosystem of the customers, what is the best, TCO, or what is for our customers bringing the most value? Is it more flexibility, as you mentioned, Frank? It's indeed a use case that articulates well when you say public clouds and occasional events, making a redundant scheme of an existing platform. That's where we can orchestrate, software modems in the cloud or software modems on-prem. That could, run in parallel with the main, workflow. So key is to have the flexibility on both the deployment aspects. So deployment means you have to bring your network processing modem into a full digital or software world, but then you also have to work with the ability to cover both the traditional antennas as well as the future, a combination of antenna vendor, book vendors to be able to hand off or to feedback the IP flows towards and from the antenna. So with us, as a strategy,
that roadmap is a really interesting question, which we'll talk about in a moment. Many of you have already said what you sort of think this software-defined digital ground segment is. Well, I want to turn to you because your company's already doing a lot with software. I actually was chatting with your CEO, and he said, that's going to be our value add. That's going to be our edge going forward. And I thought that was a very interesting comment to come from an operator.
No, I think Joe's exactly right too. Right. When we look at what our customers want and need and expect, and then what's available in the market to be able to provide that, software is such a critical component to it. Right. And let's just talk satellites for a second, right? Let's build on what Bert was saying. You have a software-defined satellite, right? Which typically means they have their little spot beams, the hot beams, and they have gateway beams. And now they can mix between the two. They have a channelizer that can move this to that, right? And that's great, right? That's awesome flexibility. Move the power where you need it to be able to support that infrastructure. So now the satellite has a software component where it can move its demand around where it needs. And then we need the flexibility on the ground to be able to accommodate that. Very few are the days where we have an SCPC link, right? A single channel per carrier where you set up a link and you set the power and then you let it just sit there for eternity and it's done, right? Everything is moving as we go through it, right? And Bird and Stewart both see that in great detail, not just a site moving around between beams, but now the beams are moving as well, or where those power functions are. So your ability to control those at the ground side is really important. So that's an API, right? It's how you talk to software to tell it to do it based off of a command set of instructions, right? Just to break it down into a lay form. So, imagine you could have an algorithm that says, when this ship goes here, move this beam, change this power level, set this mod code, right? And it all does it automatically in the background. And when Joe talks about software enabling us for the future, that's part of what it means, right? It means that we need that to be automated. No longer can Will sit there and watch that ship and go, oh, he's in the new beam, new gradient, and then I go in and I punch in the new forms for the modem. Gone are those days. It's all got to be done automatically. And that requires the hub antenna to change, power levels in the amplifier, check your receive levels, right? Change a network, move a network around. Maybe you turn one off, right? We're not quite there with APIs yet to these days, but we can certainly adjust and balance the power levels and look for the maximum ability that we can get out of a site given rain or cloud conditions for that day, right? There's a lot of things that move and change. They're very, very complex systems. So having software drive, it's almost the only way to run them as we go forward. That's one system, one satellite. We have multiple options now. We've got geostationary software-defined ones that we're so used to. We have Starlink, we have OneWeb, we have L-band, we have LTE and 5G, right? There's all these new cool factors that come together that a customer wants for their service, and using software to figure out, I'm going to put these three together because this is what it is. But, oh, I need to reconfigure that one, right? There's only so much you can do as a human sitting there to try to program all of these sites before it becomes overwhelming. And you've got to have that software design side of it. And when you look at that from that perspective, one of your opening comments, Robert, which I thought was a good comment, is some people are leery about the software-defined segment. We're going to wait to do it until our customers force us to do it, or we're not really seeing that demand today. And I think from where we sit, from what we see, it's here, right? Maybe there's some parts of the market where you still have the SCPC link you can set up, and it doesn't change. But so much of our world is becoming dynamic in how these things move, and the system's more complex so that you can get more out of them. And HTS satellites and Viasat-3, all those little spot beams that it has, or would have, is a very complex thing.
Unfortunately, yes, it's would have.
I know. I don't even know how to touch that one, but we were planning on it. So, you need that software control layer to do it. And then, like Bert said, there's two sides to it, right? There's the network side, which is one piece of it. And then there's the teleport side, which is yet another piece to it. And that's only for one satellite system. Start looking at multiple satellite systems and multiple antennas and multiple birds, and it gets even more and more complex. So you have to move to the software side of things.
Interesting. The old SCPC link that you nailed up and charged for month after month used to be like that used to be great.
Bread and butter. We could do that all day.
Exactly. So Stuart, I've heard you say a couple of times, you don't need all this stuff if you're just doing SCPC. So I guess you would agree with Will about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's face it, the industry used to be driven solely by the broadcast industry. And, that was a set and forget type service. You know, if you put up a carrier for 15 years, it was wonderful. And so, and if you still have that business and you're still doing that, you don't need a software-defined ground. You don't need dynamic capability. You don't need flexibility. You don't need scale. But as soon as you move into the IP transport world, like Will and Bert and pretty much everybody else has said, IP networks are dynamic and they're constantly changing. The service levels, I mean the data rates and data requirements and service levels, it all changes, with time of day and activities. Let alone with you're starting to move to support a mobile platform. Just adds a whole nother level of complexity. And then, as Will pointed out, now you also have the multi-orbit level complexity to deal with. And, in the not too distant future, you're going to get to the flat panel antennas that have multi-beam capability, which is going to add another level of complexity. And I think if you take a step back and look at this, what's happened is, when, we had FSS satellites and we did broadcast, bandwidth efficiency drove the economics of your service and drove your profitability. And so everything was focused on bandwidth efficiency. And that's why you end up with proprietary networks, because getting that extra 0.2 dB mattered a lot. Now with software-defined satellites that have 20 to 50 to 100 times the bandwidth of legacy satellites, and having the option of GEO, MEO, and LEO, bandwidth is still important, but it's not the critical factor. Now the critical factor is scale. How do I scale and support all these things? So that means scale means automation. So it goes right back to what Will was saying, that, hey, I need this software defined, because if it's software defined, I can automate it. If it's hardware, it's really hard to automate, and especially if I need to switch between systems. I mean, if you look at like the flat panel antenna providers who are looking at multi-beam capabilities, and if you look at about the idea of putting hardware modems behind it, it kills their value proposition. But if they can have software-defined modems or software modems just in generic compute behind that antenna, and then they can switch between networks and orbits and things like that, it greatly increases the value proposition of that flat panel antenna to the network operator. So I think this is why, the legacy broadcast business, there's no reason if you're doing that to look at a software-defined ground system. However, if you're in the IP transport business, then software-defined ground is what you're going to need to really be able to compete and integrate well with the telco world.
Just to add to Earth observation, IP Earth observation for sure. Software-defined broadcast, less so. I agree with you.
Yeah, and of course we all know about the large-scale market trends of broadcast versus data. I want to shift to some of the hardest questions, which is about transition, right? I mean, I've written a question, which of course is silly, but it says, does this mean all the hardware is going away? And the answer is, of course not. But Bert introduced this concept of, we're following a couple different tracks here in order to provide a transition that makes sense, because nobody throws out an expensive piece of gear until they need to. So, Dan, could you talk a little bit about your roadmap for helping for your own operations, but also for your technology customers, to help them do this in a way that makes business sense?
So yeah, as you said, it's a transition. We're still, we do a lot of the traditional. So as Stuart says, why do you want to throw out the good hardware? So we're doing a little bit of both. We're trying to get the transition. We're rolling out digital networks. We're rolling out a ground network that is on a full digital platform, virtual digital platform. And the key there is scalability, to be able to have onboarding, scalability for our customers. And those are the targets that we're looking to meet with the roadmap. We're there, we're rolling it out today, and over, getting more aggressive as our segment of the market starts growing into this technology. And again, as we roll out one platform, we're now looking how to offer these same services on the traditional side. So the roadmap also includes how to bring along our traditional services, our traditional customers, and start running them in parallel, because we need both. They're not going away. And customers can't just transition overnight. It's not cost effective. It is not something that just happens. So it's going to take time. It's going to transition over, might be several years. That's still unknown, but we want to be able to start offering both services and give that maximum capabilities and flexibilities to our customers. And this is, how we see it and what we're looking to offer, in the next coming years here.
Dan, I love the way you put that because, and it's something I've seen over and over again in tech innovation. You're building out the new system and then figuring out how to reproduce it in hardware, as opposed to saying, I'm sticking with my hardware system and bolting on some software. I mean, I think that's obviously the path to travel. So yeah.
No,
smart.
we had to just, basically start up a new system, totally independent. We're going to get that running, fully, this is a full service. And then we're going to look to move that service onto traditional hardware.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Frank, okay, so you're on both the integrator and the tech side on this thing. And what is the roadmap that you are developing, but also what is the roadmap that you're seeing work in terms of the customers that you deal with?
Yeah, so as you highlighted, we operate our own infrastructure as well as advise and build infrastructure for other sides. So we do get to see sort of both sides of the fence. I'm going to touch on a couple of things that Dan said. One, cost is that word that's kind of floating around in the background, but cost is obviously a driver for everything here. If you look at the virtualization of the core network that was attached to the baseband, that was attached to the RF side of things, we've already seen that trend move down, and a lot of that is, they wanted virtualized appliances at the teleports so that they could run applications and be able to change those applications on a shorter cycle. So, I don't think we're in tech cycles that are 7 years long anymore. I mean, I used to say, okay, we're in a tech cycle that's 5 years long, and I would argue that we're probably in a tech cycle now that's 3 years long now. So the idea of trying to invest in hardware that has to have a 7-year lifespan to make it, total cost of ownership, it just doesn't, from a cost perspective, it doesn't make sense over time. But the other side of the equation where we're seeing it is the idea of the demand of what the customer wants to do. So we're very similar, to what it is. We have traditional customers who are completely happy with the existing environment. And I'll caveat that until they're not, right? Which is all of a sudden you can look even in broadcast, right? You can look at broadcast and say, oh yeah, we're completely happy with our current system, but now we want to go into a full IP environment. And then things change. So our roadmap's a traditional business model. We have capital that we have to expire. We have needs of our customers that we have to onboard. So very similar to Dan, we have some traditional sides, I guess, and we have our service model looking forward. But we have the benefit of having customers that are asking us for bespoke networks now. And I would say where they're comfortable is they're very comfortable with the virtualization of their network appliances on the terrestrial side. And we're just seeing that push farther and farther through. So as that equipment, as that virtualization becomes more available from STE, from Kratos, from the likes of that, we are seeing an uptake in that, but they want to see what the benefit is. And to some degree, the roadmaps are different because we have some customers that are looking 5 years out for their network, and then we have some that we need to do something tomorrow. So we see it all over the place, but the reality, I think Bert was the original one that raised it. It's really driven by total cost. What's the cost of ownership? And those cycles are much shorter. So the costs are greater when you divide them over a shorter time span. So we're seeing it in gradual, but I would say we're seeing it from the core network, move into the baseband, then move into the digitization of RF. I think it's a bleed through, if you will.
Okay, so you said something there that I'm going to pick up on. I mean, I think it was Stewart who talked about the fact that baseband bandwidth efficiency was the most important thing, and now it's not. And yet, we all know about people. It takes them a long time to move off of one orientation into another. So, in terms of the people you're selling to, how do they have to change their people set? And of course, Will, you can speak directly to this. You know, and as can you, Frank.
I'd like an opportunity to address that if I may.
You go right. You
because-
just go ahead. You got the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, just one quick reply to that, because the idea of saying efficiency doesn't matter, or not that it doesn't matter, it holds less weight, is an argument that's been around for a while, and going back in history, Network Innovations was the alpha customer along with Airbus of, at that time, the new dialogue platform. And just to show you the difference of the two, Airbus adopted that platform specifically for efficiency. You know, they have large networks. It would be like me and Will talking about efficiency. The scale difference is massive, right? The Network Innovations was the alpha customer because efficiency brought us new capability. So efficiency is a two-edged sword. Maybe from my perspective, sometimes when we look at efficiencies or we look at things, it also brings more capability on what you can deliver, as opposed to simply the cost efficiency of the bandwidth.
Okay, a nuance, it's important. But now let me get you to speak briefly to the question I asked, which is, you know, the people skills have got to be different as we transition into this new era. So how should teleport operators be thinking about that?
Do they?
Oh,
I don't know. I
okay.
think
Like,
it
Will's going
happens
to challenge me. Good, go for it.
I mean, I don't know that they're terribly different. I think Frank's flow is really a good way to look at it, right? It's not an overnight change. It starts in one place and it starts to flow through the system, just like anything that we deal with, right? It's not gonna overnight. We're not going to start having amplifiers that are software defined, right? Although we can start to address them with APIs, and we're seeing a lot of growth. It's great, right? But you know, I do think a lot of the core business does start to move, right? I think somebody on here, we talked about broadcast earlier, right? Broadcast SCPCs versus, you know, dynamic networks or Earth observation, all of that's changed. You know, if you're in broadcast, it doesn't really matter. Your engineers stay the same, they don't change, right? If you're in Earth observation, it's a growth segment anyway, it's new. It's really dependent on the software defined nature of it. Most of the LEOs are too. You're seeing these constellations that just can't afford to own their own teleports. So they need to be able to buy teleport time essentially. And that denotes the software defined nature on how those things operate. So now you have a software company that's maybe focused on how to sell teleport time, right? And then we sell teleport time or whomever to them, and then we maintain the antennas. So from depending on where you're at in that market segment, depends on how you change your engineers to focus on it. Now, in our case, you are right? Like when we look at what our core business is, converting megahertz to megabits, like Frank said, obviously really important when you look at scale and how many you buy and how do you make sure you convert it efficiently, because it does equate to dollars at the end of the day. But now we're also talking about our future, our vision of software and how software can manage a lot of these things. You need to make sure that we have that software component covered. So it doesn't change current jobs, but it adds a new feature, right? It adds a new capability to what the business needs to be able to do. You have to have that software component. You have to have those core tools, that architecture that you can pull from so that you can give this software component to your end customers, right? You've got to be able to get your hands out of the customer side of it and let things run automatically. But you still have to have teleport engineers there to work on teleports. You still have to have amplifiers. You still have to have hub equipment, whether it's physically at the teleport or it's at the data center. It still exists, right? You have to be able to talk to RF networks. So you still have this need for that part of the segment, but you also have this new part, right? And you've got to be able to foster that new part to be able to enable that new level of service with everything else that you have.
Okay, so you have to have everything, you know.
Yeah, you got it.
But for less money. So I got that. That all works. So I want to ask each of you to address two topics. We've got about 10 minutes left to talk about this. One is, can you give us, I said earlier on, and there seems to be general agreement that we're going to see, as we move into this transition, we're going to be seeing short-term, you know, payback in terms of whether it's better customer experience or new capabilities and so forth. So could you give us an example of that from your, you know, what your customers have experienced or what you've experienced? And secondly, Could you give us your advice for a teleport operator who's a customer for technology or a competitor for you, Will, and maybe a competitor and customer for you, Frank? Um, what should they be looking at? Right, there's a transition here. It's going to go on for the next several years. Hard to say how long. What should they be paying the most attention to make sure that their facility stays competitive? So, Bert, two questions. One is an example, if you will, of an improvement, and the other is the issue of what you would advise your teleport operators to be looking at. Why don't you lead us off, Bert?
Yeah, so the first one I think is complementing what Will said. The moment you have the ability to orchestrate functions, you automatically come closer to the operations of the customer. So what do we see that an enhanced service offering, like a tech ops offering, where you work closely with the customers in the operational aspects of being able to more dynamically deploy use cases, be it occasional, be it quicker time to market on extending capacity. I think that's where you don't have those shipments of gear and equipment anymore, but you really can orchestrate almost like in a, maybe that's an overstatement, like in a full CI/CD environment, but definitely you're cooperating closer with the customer, and that's what I see definitely as an advantage that we get upfront, involved into the customers. I would call it almost business, to make sure we can work always a concept out and get a quicker time to market and benefit from each other's applications. Your second question, Rob?
My second question was really just, if you're talking to somebody who runs a teleport operation and says, look, this is coming. The question is, what should you be doing about it in the near term? What should they be watching and what should they be investigating to make sure that they maintain a competitive operation?
I think it's a combination of, I would call it the amount of data that needs to be processed on the data path, and still look at the overall TCO. It's, I think, very important still to maintain, would call it a serious focus on efficiency in spectrum as well in the operational aspects. So I think a gradual move from current platform, and then as Frank says, you have I would call it from the central data path all the way up to the RF chain. I think definitely on the RF processing, there is still a lot of work to do, in my opinion, or in our opinion. And I think we didn't mention that too much yet on the call here, but standardization of both the digital part. So we mentioned Diffie, but also the waveform could help on accelerating software or processing more into the cloud or into the on-premises, common off the shelf or commercial off the shelf hardware. So I think it's important to understand, what's my current business, what's the step in replacement, and how can I make it more efficient? And that's probably more like a hybrid type use case. But if you then really look, as Will says, if you want to go interoperable with a terrestrial network, then things might have another dimension with respect to how the ecosystem works. Could be regenerative payloads, could even be new waveforms like 5GNR that come into place all the way to the terminal, and then there is another demand on capabilities on your platform, and you definitely see from the terrestrial guys, telco guys, that also chipset vendors have specific attention to what they implement.
Wait, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to sum this up for you, Bert. You have to watch everything.
Yeah, indeed. So short term, I think it's TCO and efficiency, and if the plans are to go interoperable with terrestrial, then I think it's very important to look at the broader.
Right, it's a much bigger topic. Dan, the two questions for you are, and you give us an example of a customer, an improvement that an operator can walk away with, and then what's the most important couple things they need to focus on in the next few years to stay current?
Yeah. So definitely where we're benefiting from is, rapid deployment and scalability. It's how quickly can we get customers turned on? What's their onboarding experience? How quickly can we do this and scale them to fit what they need? Because we will scale appropriately, and that's the key for us. And that's where we see this is that this meets that need and helps keeps everything. So on the digitalization side for us, it's definitely that's some of the elements, along with a bunch of new services, new opportunities that we can present and provide and offer to our customers that the digital platforms give us. So we're looking forward to where that stuff goes. But as I said, in the immediate, it's just right now for the scalability and deployment. Advice on what to look for, what to do is standardization. That's the key. Standardization, interoperability. It's the message Diffie has. It's where you need to start. If without standardization, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. There's going to be too many one-offs, and it's a software-defined, single-string traditional network. There's nothing innovative there. So that's going to be key. And for those that are, why should I do this? Why you got to be open-minded. You got to be looking forward. You got to ultimately you're going to have to replace your hardware, and the costs that's going to be a cost driver. So you're going to have to go through some type of obsolescence eventually. So stay in the game, stay open-minded, and there are many benefits by moving to this to a software-defined ground service. So
thank you, Dan. Thank you. Stuart, you've been very self-contained in terms of not doing a bunch of ads for Diffie, so I congratulate you on that. But the two questions, what's your answer to those same two questions?
Okay, well, I'm going to repeat a lot of what Bert and Dan said. Okay. So, for the example, I'll use the EO ground as a service market. Dan obviously knows well. I mean, that market has really been enabled by digital ground infrastructure and moving to virtualized ground infrastructure to allow them to support multiple different customers with multiple different needs in a highly, in a dynamic way, enabling ground as a service businesses. The other example I'll use that will be enabled by satellite ground system is the multi-mission terminal, where the terminal is just, the back end is not hardware modem, but generic compute. And you can use that terminal for multiple applications depending on what your need is. As for going forward, what people should look for, I will restate what Dan and Bert said a little bit. I think it's look for the opportunities to find ways to scale your business, because scale in the future is going to be really important. One of the things I look at is that people say wonder about, well, how much scale and how much growth will I need? The fact is, if you look at the telco world, the amount of money we're going to get per delivered bit is going to continue to drop. It's just a fact of life in this business. And the closer we get integrated with the telco world, the more that's going to be just an expectation. So even just to maintain your business, you're going to have to be growing the amount of data and services you're providing. So scale is eventually going to become important, and scale just means automation. As Will had started out the webinar with. So I think that's really where we got to go. And as both Bert and Dan said, you want to scale and you want to automate, you really need to standardize. And standards are important, whether it be Diffie, whether it be MEF, whether it be at the waveform level on DVB-S2X, whatever, or 5G, whatever it is, that's critical because it's hard to get scale and automation without standards.
Well, thank you. And that's a very, very clear, I guess with the title of that film, that's a clear and present danger that we have to deal with. The price for bits going down. Frank, you had talked about you referenced cost and about how things are going to our replacement cycle is going to get shorter. So what's the benefit that we get in return for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, your question as to what you should be watching, I think there's two things for the near term. One is if we address the audience of the WTA, the independent teleport operator, it's one thing for myself or Will as a service operator who happens to have teleports. Our service tends to dictate what our decisions are. But let's say a teleport operator, I think you need to invest in digital signal processing, and I think you need to bring bare metal storage and compute to the edge. Signal processing, simply because we're getting into a world where interference is not an occasional thing. It's a hourly, minute by minute occurrence. So signal processing, I think, is something we didn't talk a lot about here, but I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. And second, the idea, most teleports are a capital venture, right? So it's that capital expenditure. Where are you going to spend your money? Having bare metal storage and compute at your teleport. We have data centers that are putting teleports on their roofs. We should have teleports that have data centers underneath them. I mean, that's the reality that we're seeing.
Actually, we do. I've never visited one lately that wasn't basically a data center with dishes. So yeah,
it's just not promoted that way, I think. But a lot of it was a place to house appliances. Now it should just house storage and compute.
interesting. Will, last word to you in terms, since it's some distance, halfway, quarter of the way through a transition like this. What's the benefit that you're seeing, and what do you think your colleagues out there should be looking at?
Yeah, I think everybody kind of touched it, but maybe I'll put a little more color around it. At the end of the day, we're all businessmen. We're engineers dressed up as businessmen, but we're all businessmen. And when we look at the core KPIs that drive our business, it's dollars per uplink megahertz. And what we're seeing in the market with the satellites and Starlink in particular, we're seeing a decline in our total cost, our total revenue to be able to deliver a megabit, right? The cost has to come down. Frank said it. He said it well as well. So it doesn't really matter what technology you look at, or what software you look at, or what standardization you take part in, or what your refresh cycle is. As Frank said, it's a capital business in teleports. You've got to find a way to reduce your cost for your uplink megahertz, because that's the end of the day, it's what the teleports are, because it's an additive cost to the bandwidth cost. And then you have your hub costs and everything else that goes into that overall service, and that total service value is coming down. So from what we see, how we keep that teleport cost down and how we monitor that, as well as how do we bring a premier experience to our customers by combining different technologies like Starlink and OneWeb. Right? If I could give teleport operators anything, it's don't underestimate Starlink and what they're doing. Don't underestimate what OneWeb can do, or what Amazon, they just launched their 2 prototype satellites on Friday, what they're going to do. Right? We have to look at all of that and make sure that we're positioning ourselves for the future and leveraging things like software to be able to bring our total cost of supply down. I mean, ultimately, that's what it's all about.
Wow, thank you. This has been an extremely informative 40 or 50 minutes. I want to thank each of you for contributing to it. And I'm sorry we have to stop the conversation there, because I have a whole bunch of things I want to say, but I'm not going to get to say them. So anyway, my sincere thanks to the gentlemen on this webinar, and I'm going to just start sharing my screen again to share a couple of additional points with you out there in our audience. First of all, thanks to all of them. Do take a moment, if you would be so kind, to please fill out our online survey after the webinar, because your feedback is very much appreciated. There is an executive summary of this document available for download from the WTA website. You can simply just go to the chat, find that link, click it, and you will be the proud owner of that executive summary. Looking forward, October 10, 12, we're there, ASBCC taking place in Asia. Randall Barney's right there, actually, and that's where he came in from. So if you get a chance to say hello to him, or if you want to connect with him there's his email address. We'll shortly be at Silicon Valley Space Week. Look forward to seeing some of you there. Designing the Digital Ground Segment of the Future is available on our site. It's free to WTA members and for sale to others. And then in December, we're going to be publishing the Teleport Business Model in a software-driven world, because this technology change we're talking about is ultimately over time going to transform the business model, as Will and some of our other speakers addressed. And that's a very serious issue that we need to look at in the future. So thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you with our next webinar. Guys, thanks so much for your time and for your expertise.